Over the next few moments, we're going to take a look at a few of the commands and how to use them in Chapter 6, Working with Commands. There are, there's about 7 or 8 commands that we'll look at in this chapter. There's a few that we'll focus more so on than others. In general, a lot of what we're talking about is information. Well, let me back up. Aside from the alias command, many of these things are designed to give you information about commands and in some cases other topics inside of your Linux system, and many, if not most of these, work in a Unix environment as well. He starts off the chapter and talks about what exactly are commands. There are 4 different things that they mention here, but 3 of them are really the focus of this chapter. When we talk about a command, there are executable programs, which is some sort of program that somebody has written, such as, for example, the CP command to copy something, or the MV command to move something or rename something. Those are programs that have been written in some sort of code. They've got something you type in to execute them, or if you're used to a GUI environment, you double click on something. It's some sort of executable program. Now, keep in mind, in Linux and Unix, they don't have a .exe extension like you're accustomed to seeing in a Windows environment, but they're just some sort of written executable program. As opposed to what you see number 2 here, a command built into the bash shell itself. Now, what does that mean? Keep in mind the bash shell is this terminal environment that we've got here. So when I open up this GUI terminal environment, I'm opening up a bash shell here. Well, built into this shell, keep in mind bash, the shell itself, is a program where there are other subcommands built into this shell that are a part of it. And we can determine, certain types, what is a built-in command versus an executable program by using some of the commands that we see up here, the type command being a good example. The alias command we'll look at briefly at the end, but an alias command is simply a way of defining what you might think of as a shortcut to another command, and we'll demonstrate that. The type command that you see demonstrated here, notice the syntax, it's very simple. It's just type and then the name of the command that you're looking at or trying to find information on. So if I do type and let's do CP, it tells me the location of that CP command. All right. In effect, what that's telling you, if you see that CP is located in some directory somewhere, you know that that's some sort of executable program that somebody has written. All right, it's some sort of executable program that somebody has written. Versus if I type, let's pick another command, for example. If I do the CD command, the CD command, it tells me, is a shell built-in command, meaning the CD command is a part of the bash shell environment. You're not going to go somewhere and find the program called CD in the bin directory like we see with CP command, for example. There's another command called which we can see down here in our textbook. It says displays an executable's location. That simply means that, somewhat like the type command did for us, it tells us where that command lives, what directory that command lives in the Linux or the Unix file system. If I try another command, such as ifconfig, we see that it's located in the sbin directory. Keep in mind some distinctions here. You've got a bin directory and an sbin directory. You also have a user usr/bin directory and a user /sbin directory. Typically when you see something in the sbin directory, it's a command that allows you to make some type of configuration change and usually requires you to have some level of administrative style access to use the command to its full extent. Now, it's not to say you can't use the command. You may be able to use the command to give you information, but you can't use the command to make changes to the system. The ifconfig command is an example of that. I, as just a regular user account without changing my privileges, I can run the ifconfig command, which is very close to the ipconfig command in Windows. And it tells me my IP address here. It tells me my MAC address, the subnet mask, and so on. However, I can't use the ifconfig command to make changes to my network settings unless I elevate the privileges of my user account. So we've got the type command and we've got the which command. Again, which command tells me where that command lives in the file system. Here's another example. The ls command that we use to do so many listings, it's located in the bin directory. The bin directory is available to any of the regular user accounts, and all the commands in there are typically usable by any normal or typical user account. Most of these commands, again, in the bin directory, we use to gather information, whereas commands in the sbin directory typically can be used to make changes to the system also. Here's the cd command. We say which cd, and it says user bin which no cd in. That's a rather strange message, but in effect, what did we find out about the cd command earlier? That it's a shell built-in command. So it's not really located necessarily in the file system per se. Here's some documentation, and this is where we begin to look at how we can get help information on various pieces or on various commands, or in some cases on for example, various configuration files that are built into the system. Well, here it tells us the bash is a built-in help facility available for each of its shell built-in characters or shell built-in commands. So if I know that the command I'm using is a shell built-in, I can use the help command to pull up information on it. Notice what they've done here. They said help cd. We saw earlier. Let's go back to our terminal window here. We saw earlier here with the type command that cd is a shell built-in command. Well, now I can type help cd, since I know that it's a shell built-in command, and pull up some information about that particular command. Okay. Gives me some options, gives me a description of the command. But notice, again, what we're saying here. Help, okay, the help command allows me to see documentation about shell built-in commands. So think of this as like a manual or help files for commands that are built into the actual shell environment itself. This will be helpful in general, but you'll notice when square brackets appear in the description of a command syntax, they indicate optional items, meaning that if something is bracketed in a syntax diagram, and this is for not just the help files, but in most any situation, if something is in brackets, that means it is not required for the command to operate properly. In other words, I don't have to necessarily include a capital -L or a capital -P, for example, to use this command. They are optional. They are options that may change the output or change the behavior of the command slightly. Here, not to be confused with a help command, but this is like an option for commands. And this works on most any command in the system. So take the cp command. If I do cp-help and hit enter, it brings up help information about that particular command. If we scroll back up to the top here, I see some syntax diagrams. I see various options that I can incorporate with the command. And if I scroll down, it gives me additional narrative description of the command and different things to do with it. Occasionally, unfortunately not as often as we'd like, sometimes you will even see examples of how to use the command in the various help documents. But again, that seems to be more infrequent, unfortunately. So, just to demonstrate that again, let's choose a different command. Let's say mv-help. Again, pulls up help information on that particular command. This is not a shell built-in command. This is an executable command. Keep that in mind. MV, here are my syntax diagrams. Again, various switches or options that I can use with it. Some other descriptions of the command. This works with most any command that you have that you'd be typing in at the terminal window. Probably the most commonly used source of information or help information in a Linux or Unix system are what are referred to as the man pages, or sometimes manual pages for long. Again, if you hear somebody say man pages or the man program, they're talking about this command. It's simply man, and it allows me to pull up usually a fairly extensive list of help items about a particular, in this case, command, or in some cases, perhaps a configuration file or other technology on the system. There are 8 different sections, or what some people call chapters, to the man pages. Typically, you don't have to worry about what section you're dealing with, but we'll show you how to use the different sections or chapters here in just a moment if you should need to specify a specific chapter. Let's look at, we'll look at their example here. Man ls. Let's bring that up. Do man and then ls. Tells me the name of the command, gives me the synopsis area, somewhat like a syntax diagram, and then it begins the description part. Again, lots of different switches. Notice with many of the switches or options that some have a long format and some have a long and short format. For example, the capital dash, the dash capital B, and the dash dash ignore dash backups both have the same function. You could use either one interchangeably. Most people will tend to use the shorter version of the option, but again, either one will work just fine. So again, lots and lots of options here. Typically, the man pages are going to be a little more extensive in their discussion than just using a dash dash help option. As we scroll through this, again, lots and lots of options that we see available here with the ls command. And then we get down, gives you some narrative description, gives you the author of this particular man page, tells you how to report bugs about it, copyright information. And then it also gives you this information here, which we'll refer back to later, dealing with the info command. Okay. Here we see an example of how someone has referenced a specific chapter to look for a specific piece of information about the passwd command. The passwd command is used to change passwords. We'll use it later on. The most commonly referenced chapters are 5 and 8. Again, 5 and 8. If you see someone manually referencing a chapter or a section in the man pages, usually it is chapter 5 or chapter 8. Not always, but typically that's what you see. Now, let's go back. Well, no, let's hold on just a moment here. The apropos display appropriate commands. So it's possible to search the list of man pages for possible matches based on a search term. It's very crude, but sometimes helpful. Notice what it says. Search the list of man pages. Search the list of man pages. Let's go back to my terminal here. And if I want to exit a man page, notice it says press Q to quit. So I'll press the Q key. And then I'll do apropos. And I'm going to type in the word cron. Cron is part of the scheduled task system inside of Unix and Linux. Cron or cron tab allows me to schedule various things to run at a particular date and time. So if you wanted to schedule a backup, for example, you can use the cron tab function to do that. Well, in this case, I do apropos cron, and it searches for the word cron or the characters cron in the man pages. So I got anacron tab, anacron, cron tab. Notice 2 references to cron tab here. These parenthetic numbers are the section or chapter numbers. So I could actually do man 1 cron tab and bring up the chapter 1 information, or I could do man 5 cron tab, which incidentally is typically the page that folks are looking for on this file. Man 5 cron tab. Notice up here it tells me what chapter I'm in or section number I'm in. Scroll down, I can see a very lengthy discussion of cron tab. And as we said before, here's some examples. Some man pages will give you examples of different ways to use the, in this case, sort of the file or the syntax in the file. Okay. To exit out of this, I do Q. So what does apropos do again? It searches the man pages for references to whatever you type in here. So this is actually a way of searching the man pages, typically to see what chapters you may find information about a particular command in. Again, in this case, we got cron tab information in chapter 1, and we have cron tab information in chapter 5 or section 5, whichever word you choose to use. The what is command display a very brief description of a command. The what is program displays the name and a 1-line description of a man page matching the specified key word. 1-line description of a man page matching a specified key word. So this is telling me again the command, chapter, and a short line brief description of the command.